Kofi was released from prison that evening, his charges dismissed, his name cleared in the official records. But everyone knew the victory was hollow. Lord Jianho had been publicly humiliated, his machinations exposed, his judgment questioned by the king himself. Such a man would not simply accept defeat and retreat. "You must be careful now," Kofi told Abany when they met secretly in the gardens that night. "You have made yourself his primary target. He will not rest until he has destroyed you. Let him try. I am queen. I have the king's protection." The king's protection is not absolute. There are limits to what even a king can do when the entire nobility turns against him. And that is what Jianho will work toward now. He will paint you as foreign corruption, as a disease eating at the empire's heart. He will turn the people against you, make you so toxic that keeping you becomes politically impossible. Then what should I do? Live in fear? Hide? No. Kofi's expression was grim. You should prepare. Build your own alliances. Find nobles who will support you not out of love, but out of self-interest. Create a faction that can counter Jianho's influence. Learn to fight as he fights, with patience and strategy and willingness to strike when the moment is right. It was not the answer Abany wanted, but she knew it was the right one. The next months were spent in careful political maneuvering. She cultivated relationships with nobles who had grievances against Lord Jianho, who resented his influence over the king, who saw opportunity in aligning with the queen rather than against her. She attended banquets and ceremonies, spoke with the wives of influential men, learned to navigate the subtle currents of court politics. It was exhausting and often demeaning. She had to smile at people who despised her, accept compliments she knew were false, pretend not to hear insults spoken just loudly enough for her to catch. But slowly, painfully, she built a network of support. Not love, not loyalty, but mutual advantage. It would have to be enough. She also worked to strengthen her connection with the people, both African and Korean. She made a point of visiting the Eastern Quarter openly, demonstrating that she had not forgotten her origins. She commissioned Korean artists to create works celebrating African culture, paying them generously and displaying the results in the palace. She established a fund to help impoverished families, regardless of their origin, with food and medicine and schooling for their children. The Korean population remained largely hostile, but there were cracks in that hostility. Merchants who benefited from her patronage, artisans who appreciated her support of their work, common people who saw her acts of charity and wondered if perhaps foreigners were not the threat they had been told. King Seongjun watched her political education with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I never wanted this for you," he said one night as they lay together. "I wanted you to be my partner, not a warrior fighting daily battles just to survive. We do not always get what we want. But I would rather fight beside you than be decorative and useless. You could never be useless." He pulled her closer. "You have changed me, Abany. Made me see the empire differently. I was raised to believe that stability required maintaining tradition, that change was dangerous. But you have shown me that refusing to change is its own form of danger. That stagnation breeds resentment, and resentment breeds violence. Have I also shown you that foreigners can be loyal subjects? That different does not mean dangerous. Every day." He kissed her forehead. "But I fear my people are slower to learn that lesson than I am." The tension in the empire continued to build. There were more incidents in the Eastern Quarter, more violence against Africans. Korean workers organized into guilds that explicitly excluded foreigners. Merchants refused to trade with African businesses. The segregation that had always existed became more rigid, more intentional. And Lord Jianho continued his campaign, speaking everywhere about the need to preserve Korean purity, Korean tradition, Korean strength. He framed it as patriotism, as love of the homeland, as defense of everything that made the empire great. But beneath the noble rhetoric was a simple message: foreigners were the enemy, and anyone who protected them was a traitor. He was clever about it. He never directly attacked the king or queen. Instead, he spoke about abstract principles, about the natural order that placed Koreans above outsiders, about the danger of allowing foreign influence to contaminate the empire's soul. But everyone understood whom he meant. The crisis came in the form of a document. It was Kofi who brought it to Abany, his face ashen with fear. They met in her chambers, where the walls were thick and the servants had been dismissed. "What is it?" she asked, taking the scroll from his trembling hands. "A decree. Not yet issued, but circulating among the nobles for support. Jianho's latest strategy." She unrolled the scroll and began to read. With each line, her blood ran colder. It was a comprehensive law targeting all foreigners in the empire. They would be forbidden from owning property, from practicing certain trades, from gathering in groups of more than 5, from living in districts beyond designated foreign quarters. They would be required to carry identification at all times, to report their movements to local officials, to pay special taxes to support the cost of monitoring their presence. But the worst part came at the end. Any foreigner found guilty of sedition, defined broadly to include criticism of imperial policies or resistance to Korean authority, would be subject to exile or execution. And not just the individual accused, but their entire family and community. Collective punishment, designed to create an atmosphere of terror, to make every African responsible for every other African's behavior. "This is madness," Abany whispered. "This would make us criminals simply for existing. It would make us slaves in everything but name. And it has support, Abany." Jianho has been working the nobles carefully, one by one, convincing them that drastic measures are necessary. He says the king has been too lenient, too influenced by his foreign wife, too weak to take the hard steps needed to protect the empire. Songjun will never sign this. Then Jianho will use his refusal as evidence that the king is unfit to rule, that he has been corrupted beyond redemption, that for the good of the empire, he must be removed. The word hung in the air between them. Removed. Not killed, perhaps, though that was possible, but deposed, set aside, replaced with a ruler more amenable to Jianho's vision. He cannot do that. The nobles would never support a coup. They would if they believed the king was destroying the empire. They would if they were frightened enough, angry enough, convinced that their entire way of life was threatened. Jianho has been building that fear for months, years perhaps. This decree is not the end of his plan, Abany. It is the beginning. She stood, pacing, her mind racing through possibilities and finding no good options. If the king refused to sign the decree, Jianho would use it as proof of his unfitness. If he signed it, he would betray everything he believed and destroy the lives of thousands of innocents. Either way, Jianho won. "There has to be a way to stop this," she said. "Some way to expose his real intentions, to turn the nobles against him. He is too careful. He has built his support too gradually. He never says anything that could be called outright treason, never commits himself to positions that could be used against him. He simply asks questions, raises concerns, plants doubts. Then we must be more direct. An idea was forming, dangerous and desperate. We must force him to reveal his true nature. Make him overreach, make him so confident that he drops his mask and shows everyone what he really is. How? I do not know yet, but I will find a way." She gripped Kofi's shoulders. "You must return to the Eastern Quarter. Tell our people to be ready. Tell them that when I give the word, they must be prepared to act, to demonstrate their loyalty to the empire in ways that cannot be ignored or dismissed." "What are you planning?" "I am planning to do what queens are not supposed to do. I am planning to fight." Over the next days, Abany worked in secret to understand the full scope of Lord Jianho's network. She spoke to servants who heard things, to minor nobles who were not yet fully committed to either faction, to Korean wives who gossiped about their husbands' political maneuverings. She built a picture of a conspiracy far more extensive than she had realized. Jianho had allies in every level of government, from minor officials to high-ranking generals. He had cultivated relationships with merchants who profited from the discrimination against foreigners, with religious leaders who preached that mixing cultures was an offense against the gods, with scholars who wrote treatises on the superiority of Korean civilization. He had built not just a political faction but a movement, one that tapped into deep veins of fear and pride in the Korean population. And at the center of it all was a simple but powerful narrative. The empire was in decline. Foreigners were responsible for that decline, and only by purging foreign influence could greatness be restored. It was a lie, but it was a lie people wanted to believe, because the alternative was harder to accept. that the empire's problems came from within, from corruption and inequality and rigid hierarchies that stifled innovation and oppressed the common people. That fixing those problems would require difficult changes, sacrifices from those who currently held power. Much easier to blame foreigners. Abany brought her findings to Songjun, spreading the documents across his desk, showing him the scope of what they faced. "It is worse than we thought," she said. Jianho is not just trying to pass discriminatory laws. He is preparing the ground for a complete transformation of the empire. He wants to expel all foreigners, close the borders, return to some imagined golden age that never actually existed. And he has convinced enough people that this is necessary that he might actually succeed. Songjun studied the papers, his face grave. "Then we must act now, before his support solidifies further. I will dismiss him from his position as chief advisor, strip him of his titles, send him to a remote province where he cannot cause harm. That will not stop this. He has built something larger than himself. Remove him and another will take his place. The movement will continue, perhaps become even more dangerous, because it will see itself as persecuted, vindicated in its beliefs. Then what do you propose?" "I propose we beat him at his own game. He has built support by creating fear of foreigners. We must demonstrate that foreigners are not the threat he claims. That we are loyal subjects, valuable members of the empire, people worth protecting rather than expelling." "How?" She took a deep breath. "By revealing a plot that does not exist." He stared at her. "I do not understand." "Jianho claims foreigners are dangerous, that we plot against the empire. What if we discovered evidence of a real plot? Not against the empire, but against the king himself. A conspiracy to assassinate you and replace you with a ruler more sympathetic to Jianho's vision. But there is no such plot. Not among Africans, no. But what if the plot came from within Jianho's own faction? What if some of his more extreme supporters had decided that simply influencing policy was not enough, that the king himself had to be removed? And what if it was foreigners who discovered this plot and brought it to light, saving the king's life and proving our loyalty?" Understanding dawned in Songjun's eyes, followed quickly by horror. "You are suggesting we fabricate evidence of treason and use it to destroy Jianho. I am suggesting we investigate his faction thoroughly and find the very real treason I suspect already exists. Jianho is too careful to commit himself openly, but some of his followers are not so cautious. They have grown bold, confident that they have the momentum. If we look closely enough, I believe we will find genuine conspiracy. Not fabrication, but truth. And if we find nothing, then we will have to consider other options. But I do not think we will find nothing. Men who speak so casually of removing kings do not always stop at words." Songjun was silent for a long moment, wrestling with the ethics of what she proposed. Finally, he nodded. "I will authorize an investigation. But it must be done carefully, secretly. If Jianho learns of it before we have proof, he will destroy any evidence and portray the investigation as persecution. Leave that to me. I have learned something about secrecy in this palace." She began the investigation through trusted intermediaries, people who owed her favors or who had their own reasons to oppose Lord Jianho. She focused on his most extreme supporters, those who spoke most loudly about the need for drastic action, who seemed barely restrained by their leader's more cautious approach. It took weeks of careful work, following leads, interviewing servants, examining correspondence. But gradually, a picture emerged. And it was worse than Abany had imagined. There was indeed a plot, but not exactly the one she had expected to find. A group of Jianho's supporters, led by a minor noble named Lord Chinmei, had been meeting in secret to discuss contingency plans for removing the king if he continued to resist their agenda. They had not yet committed to specific action, but they had discussed methods, timing, supporters who might be relied upon. More damningly, they had been in communication with Lord Jianho himself. The correspondence was carefully worded, never explicit, but the implication was clear. Jianho knew about their discussions and had not discouraged them. He had maintained plausible deniability while allowing his most radical followers to plan regicide. Abany brought the evidence to Songjun, her hands shaking as she laid out the documents. "This is treason. Not potential treason, not theoretical treason. Actual conspiracy to kill you and seize the throne. He read through the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time. I knew Jianho opposed me, he said finally. I knew he worked to undermine my authority, but I never believed he would go this far. That he would actually contemplate my murder. He is careful not to order it directly, but he has created an environment where his followers believe such actions are not just acceptable but necessary. That is almost worse than giving explicit orders. What do you counsel? How should I respond? Carefully. If you move too quickly, his supporters will claim you fabricated the evidence. If you move too slowly, the conspiracy may advance beyond talk to action. You must expose the plot publicly, with evidence so clear that even his allies cannot deny it. And you must do it in a way that shows foreigners as loyal subjects who helped uncover treason rather than as threats who had to be controlled. You want to take credit for discovering this. I want our people to receive credit for discovering this. Let it be known that it was Africans working within the palace, Africans with ties to the community, who first noticed suspicious activities and reported them. Let the narrative be that foreigners saved the king's life, not that the king had to save the empire from foreigners. Songjun smiled grimly. You have become a dangerous woman, Abany. You think 3 moves ahead, like a master game player. I learned from necessity. And from you. Then let us spring the trap together. The plan was executed with precision. King Songjun ordered the arrest of Lord Chinmay and his co-conspirators, presenting the evidence at an emergency session of the council. The documents were read aloud, the plot laid bare for all to see. Chinmay, confronted with undeniable proof, broke down and confessed everything, including Lord Jianho's tacit approval of their plans. The hall erupted into chaos. Some nobles defended Jianho, claiming he had been misled by overzealous subordinates. Others demanded his immediate arrest. Still others seemed shocked into silence, unable to process that their chief advisor had come so close to regicide. Through it all, Lord Jianho sat silent, his face a mask. But Abany could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, deciding how to respond to survive this crisis. When the king called for order and asked Jianho to respond to the accusations, he stood with perfect composure. Your Majesty, I am as shocked as anyone by Lord Chinmay's treasonous actions. If my words or deeds were misconstrued as approval, I deeply regret it. But I never authorized, encouraged, or condoned any plot against your sacred person. I have served the throne faithfully for decades. That some of my supporters acted without my knowledge does not make me guilty of their crimes. It was a masterful defense, shifting blame while maintaining dignity. But Abany had anticipated it. She stood, and the hall fell silent. Lord Jianho speaks of faithful service, she said clearly. But faithful service does not include creating an atmosphere where the king's murder seems acceptable. Faithful service does not include rhetoric that portrays the king as weak, corrupted, unfit to rule. The conspirators did not act in a vacuum, Lord Jianho. They acted in the environment you created, believing they were fulfilling your vision even if you were too cautious to give explicit orders. The queen oversteps, Jianho said coldly. She seeks to blame me for the actions of madmen because she knows I have opposed her influence from the beginning. This is personal vendetta dressed as justice. Then explain your correspondence with Lord Chinmay. Explain why you never reported his increasingly extreme statements to the king. Explain why you surrounded yourself with men who believed regicide was a solution rather than a horror. I cannot control the thoughts of every person who seeks my counsel. I cannot monitor every conversation for possible sedition. If that is the standard, then we are all guilty. They faced each other across the hall, and Abany knew this was the moment. She had to finish this, had to push him into revealing his true nature. You have spent months arguing that foreigners are dangerous, she said. That we cannot be trusted, that we threaten the empire's stability. But it was not foreigners who plotted to kill the king. It was Koreans. It was nobles. It was members of your own faction. If we are to follow your logic, should we not therefore conclude that it is Koreans who cannot be trusted? That nobility is the threat to the empire's stability. That is absurd sophistry. No more absurd than your own arguments. You have blamed an entire people for the actions of a few. You have demanded collective punishment, collective suspicion, collective restriction. I simply ask that you apply the same standard to yourself. If foreigners should be controlled because some might be disloyal, why should nobles not be controlled when we have clear evidence of noble treachery? The silence in the hall was absolute. Every noble present understood what Abany had done. She had turned Jianho's own rhetoric against him, exposed the hypocrisy at its core. If his logic was sound, it would justify restricting Korean nobles. If it was not sound, then his entire campaign against foreigners collapsed. Lord Jianho's mask finally cracked. His face contorted with rage, his voice rising. You dare compare legitimate concern for the empire's welfare with isolated criminal behavior? You dare equate Korean nobles with foreign rabble? You have no understanding of this empire, no respect for its traditions, no place in this hall. I have exactly the place the king gave me, Abany said quietly. And I have proven my loyalty by helping to uncover treason while you enabled it through your negligence or your complicity. The question is not whether foreigners can be trusted, Lord Jianho. The question is whether you can be trusted. The hall erupted again, but this time the tide had shifted. Nobles who had supported Jianho looked uncertain. Those who had been neutral began to speak against him. Even some of his allies distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with treason, however indirect. King Songjun let the chaos continue for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. Lord Jianho, you are stripped of your position as chief advisor. You will be confined to your estates pending further investigation into your knowledge of and involvement in this conspiracy. If evidence emerges that you actively encouraged treason, you will face trial. If not, you will be permitted to retire from court permanently. Either way, your time influencing imperial policy has ended. Jianho stared at the king with naked hatred. You will regret this, your majesty. You will regret allowing foreign corruption to poison your judgment, allowing that woman to destroy those who served you faithfully. The empire will suffer for your weakness. The empire will survive without your counsel. Guards, escort Lord Jianho to his quarters. As Jianho was led from the hall, he looked back at Abany one last time. The expression on his face was not defeated, but promising. This was not over. He had lost this battle, but he would find another way to strike at her, at the king, at everything they represented. Abany met his gaze without flinching. She had won today, but she knew the victory was temporary. Men like Jianho did not simply accept defeat. They planned, they waited, and they struck when their enemies felt safe. She would have to be vigilant, always vigilant, for the rest of her life. The weeks following Lord Jianho's removal were deceptively calm. The conspiracy trials proceeded, with Lord Chinmay and his co-conspirators found guilty and sentenced to exile. The discriminatory decree that would have targeted all foreigners was quietly withdrawn. The nobles who had supported Jianho scrambled to distance themselves from his faction, pledging renewed loyalty to the king. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Jianho remained under house arrest, but his influence had not disappeared. His supporters, though quieter now, still believed in his vision. And the common Korean population, which had been fed a steady diet of anti-foreign rhetoric for months, did not suddenly change their minds because one conspiracy had been exposed. Abany tried to use the moment to improve conditions for her people. She proposed laws that would grant foreigners more rights, protections against arbitrary arrest, access to legal representation, the ability to own small businesses. King Songjun supported these measures, and without Jianho to organize opposition, several passed through the council. But the victories felt hollow. She knew that laws on paper meant little if the people enforcing them did not believe in them. And many officials, from local magistrates to city guards, still viewed foreigners with suspicion and contempt. The breaking point came on a cold winter evening, 3 months after Jianho's fall. Abany was working in her chambers, reviewing petitions from African families seeking redress for various injustices, when Lady Hygiene burst in without announcement. The older woman's face was pale, her hands trembling. "Your Majesty, there is news from the Eastern Quarter." "Terrible news." Abany's blood went cold. "What has happened?" "A fire. It started in one of the African neighborhoods and spread quickly. Dozens of buildings have burned. Many dead, many more injured. Was it an accident?" Lady Hygiene hesitated. "The city guard says it was an accident, a cooking fire that got out of control. But the people in the quarter say it was set deliberately. They say they saw Korean men with torches, heard them shouting that foreigners should burn like the plague they represent. Abany was already moving toward the door. I must go there. I must see. Your Majesty, it is not safe. The king has forbidden you to leave the palace grounds without heavy guard, and organizing such protection will take time. Then I will go without protection. Those are my people dying. And if you die with them, what good will that do? Please let the king know first. Let him send proper assistance. Abany forced herself to stop, to think rather than simply react. Lady Hygiene was right. Running into danger would help no one. But the thought of her people suffering while she sat safe in the palace was unbearable. She sent for King Songjun immediately. He arrived within minutes, already dressed for riding, having heard the news himself. I am organizing a relief effort, he said before she could speak. Food, blankets, physicians. The city guard will secure the area and begin investigating the cause of the fire. The same city guard who may have allowed it to happen? The same officials who have ignored violence against Africans for months. I will send my personal guard as well, soldiers loyal to me rather than to local authorities. And I will go myself to oversee the response. Then I am coming with you. Abany, it is too dangerous. It is too dangerous for me to remain here doing nothing while people die. I am queen. My people need to see that I have not forgotten them, that I am willing to stand with them even now. If I hide in the palace, I prove everything Jianho ever said about me, that I care more for my own safety than for justice. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. Then we go together. But you stay close to me, and you follow my guard's instructions without question. Agreed. Agreed. They rode through the city in darkness, surrounded by soldiers, the smell of smoke growing stronger as they neared the eastern quarter. When they arrived, the devastation was worse than Abany had imagined. Entire blocks had been reduced to ash and rubble. Families huddled in the streets, their belongings piled around them, their faces blank with shock. The injured lay on makeshift pallets, tended by overwhelmed healers who lacked proper supplies. Abany dismounted and began moving among her people, speaking words of comfort that felt inadequate, promising help that she prayed she could deliver. They reached for her, calling her name, some weeping, others simply staring as though unable to comprehend that their queen was here, in the midst of their suffering. An old woman gripped her hand with surprising strength. They set the fires, Your Majesty. I saw them. Korean men with torches and hatred in their eyes. The guard did nothing, just watched as we burned. I believe you, Abany said. And I swear to you, there will be justice. The king himself is here to ensure it. King Songjun was speaking with the captain of the city guard, his voice sharp with anger. Abany joined them, catching the tail end of the conversation. 30 guards stationed near this quarter, and you claim none of them saw anything suspicious? No one noticed large groups of men with torches moving through the streets. Your Majesty, the fire spread so quickly, we were focused on evacuation and containment. If there were arsonists, they escaped in the chaos. How convenient. Songjun's voice was ice. You are relieved of duty, Captain. Report to the palace for questioning about your negligence. I am placing this investigation under the authority of my personal guard. The captain's face went white, but he bowed and retreated. Songjun turned to Abany. This was deliberate. No accident burns so perfectly through African neighborhoods while leaving Korean buildings untouched. Someone planned this, organized it, executed it while the city guard conveniently looked the other way. Jianho, perhaps. Or his supporters, acting without his direct order, but believing they serve his cause. Either way, this is the result of the poisonous climate he created. He raised his voice, addressing the gathered crowd. People of the Eastern Quarter, I am King Songjun, and I swear to you that this atrocity will not go unpunished. Those responsible will be found and brought to justice. You will be provided with food, shelter, and aid to rebuild. You are subjects of this empire, and you will be protected as such. The crowd murmured, not quite believing but desperately wanting to. Kofi emerged from the shadows, his face streaked with ash, his eyes red from smoke. Your Majesty, thank you for coming. But words will not protect us. We need more than promises. We need to know that this will never happen again. Then help me make that possible, Songjun said. Tell me who did this. Give me names, descriptions, anything that can lead to the perpetrators. Kofi looked at the frightened faces around him, then back at the king. If we testify, we become targets. Already we are blamed for the fire, accused of setting it ourselves for attention or to justify demands for special treatment. Giving evidence will only paint marks on our backs. I will protect any who come forward. You cannot protect us all, Your Majesty. And Jianho's supporters are everywhere. They hold positions in every level of government, every magistrate's office, every guard post. They will know who spoke against them, and they will strike back when you are not watching. It was the truth, and everyone knew it. Abany looked at her husband and saw the same helpless anger she felt. They had power, yes, but that power had limits. They could not be everywhere, could not defend everyone, could not root out hatred that had grown deep roots in the empire's soil. Then what do you counsel? Songjun asked quietly. Should I do nothing? Except that some of my subjects will always be hunted, always be vulnerable, while others live in safety. I counsel that you give us the means to defend ourselves. Let Africans serve in the city guard. Let us form our own watch in our own quarter. Give us the legal right to arm ourselves, to testify in court on equal terms with Koreans, to demand justice rather than begging for it. The request hung in the air, radical and dangerous. Arming foreigners, giving them official positions, treating them as equal citizens rather than as tolerated guests, these were the kinds of changes that could spark rebellion among the Korean population. But refusing meant condemning Africans to perpetual vulnerability. I will consider your request, Songjun said finally. But I can make no promises. The nobles would resist such changes with every tool at their disposal. Then we will continue to burn, Kofi said flatly. And you will continue to make promises you cannot keep. They returned to the palace in silence, both exhausted and heartsick. In her chambers, Abany finally allowed herself to weep, great racking sobs that shook her entire body. Songjun held her, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back and looked at him with red eyes. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot sit in this palace wearing silk and jewels while my people suffer. I cannot play the role of gracious queen while atrocities are committed in the streets. Either I have power or I do not. Either I can protect them or I cannot. And if I cannot, then what is the point of any of this? You have done more than any foreigner in the empire's history. You have changed laws, saved lives, given hope to people who had none. And yet they still burn. So what good is hope? Hope is what keeps us fighting. Hope is what prevents us from surrendering to men like Jianho. He cupped her face in his hands. You are tired. You are grieving. But do not give up now, Abany. Do not let one horrible night undo everything you have built. It is not one night. It is every night, every day, every moment knowing that people hate me and hate my people for no reason beyond our existence. I am tired of fighting, Songjun. I am tired of being hated. I am tired of watching people die because I cannot protect them. Then let me help you. Let me share the burden. We are stronger together than apart. She wanted to believe him. But she had seen the limits of his power, the constraints that bound even a king. And she knew that Lord Jianho, despite his house arrest, was still dangerous. The fire had been his message, delivered through subordinates, but carrying his intent as clearly as if he had set the torches himself. You may have defeated me in the palace, but I can still destroy everything you love. The next days confirmed her fears. The investigation into the fire went nowhere. Witnesses were too frightened to testify. Physical evidence was scarce. The few suspects identified had alibis provided by respectable Korean citizens who swore they had been nowhere near the eastern quarter that night. And then, a week after the fire, Abany received a message. It was delivered by a servant she did not recognize, a young Korean woman who approached her in the garden and pressed a folded paper into her hand before disappearing into the palace corridors. Abany opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was elegant, unmistakable. Lord Jianho's. Your Majesty, it read, you have won several battles, but the war is far from over. Every protection you secure for your people makes them more hated by mine. Every law you change creates resentment that will eventually explode into violence far worse than what you have already witnessed. You cannot save them, because saving them requires destroying the very empire that gives you power. I offer you a choice. Return to your people. Renounce your position as queen. Leave the palace and live quietly in the Eastern Quarter. In exchange, I will use my influence, which you know remains considerable despite my current constraints, to ease the persecution. I will counsel moderation, discourage violence, argue for tolerance if not acceptance. But if you remain as queen, if you continue to contaminate the throne with your presence, I will spend every remaining day of my life ensuring that Africans in this empire suffer. Every fire will be set in your name. Every beating will be justified as resistance to your influence. Every death will be laid at your feet. You can save your people, but only by sacrificing yourself. Choose wisely, Your Majesty. You have until the next full moon. Abany read the message 3 times, her hands shaking with rage and fear. It was extortion, pure and simple. And yet she knew Giant Ho was not bluffing. He had the network, the influence, the commitment to carry out his threat. He might be under house arrest, but he could still reach into the city, could still inspire violence, could still make her people pay for her defiance. She burned the letter, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Then she went to find Kofi. He listened to her recount the letter's contents without interruption. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at the ground. "What will you do?" he asked finally. "I do not know. If I refuse, he will make good on his threat. More people will die, and their blood will be on my hands. But if I agree, I abandon everything we have fought for. I prove that foreigners can be driven out through intimidation and violence. I set a precedent that will haunt our people for generations. Those are not the only 2 options. What else is there?" Kofi looked up, and she saw something in his eyes she had rarely seen before: fury. "We could remove him permanently. Not arrest, not house arrest, not exile. Permanent removal. He has given you the justification. He has threatened the queen, promised violence against imperial subjects, attempted to extort someone under the king's protection. Those are capital crimes. You're suggesting I have him killed. I am suggesting you defend yourself and your people by eliminating a threat that has proven it will never stop. How many more must die before that becomes acceptable?" The thought had crossed her mind, of course. But speaking it aloud made it real, made it a choice she would have to own. She was not naive enough to think kings and queens did not sometimes order deaths for political reasons. But she had never imagined being the one to give such an order. "I will think about it," she said finally. "Think quickly. You have only until the full moon." She did think about it, obsessively, turning the question over in her mind from every angle. She consulted no one, not even Song Jun, because she knew what he would say. He would tell her it was too dangerous, that ordering Giant Ho's death would create a martyr, would give his followers justification for even greater violence. He would tell her there were other ways, legal ways, proper ways. But proper ways had failed. Legal ways had left her people burning. And time was running out. 3 nights before the full moon, she made her decision. She summoned a man she had met only once before, a palace official named Master Sung Ho, who had helped her investigate the conspiracy against the king. He had methods, she knew, that went beyond official channels. He had contacts in the shadows, people who could make things happen without leaving traces. He came to her chambers late at night, when the palace was quiet and the corridors empty. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. "How may I serve you?" "I need someone removed. Permanently. Quietly. Without any connection to the palace or to me." His expression did not change. "May I know the target?" "Lord Giant Ho." Now his expression did shift, just slightly. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "That is a difficult task, Your Majesty. He is under guard, watched carefully, his movements restricted." "You're saying it cannot be done?" "I am saying it will be expensive and risky. But yes, it can be done. If you are certain this is what you want." Was she certain? Could she live with herself after ordering a man's death, no matter how justified? Could she live with herself if she did not, and more of her people died? "I am certain," she said, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "When can it be accomplished?" Within the week, if circumstances allow. It will appear to be natural causes, a sudden illness, a weak heart. No investigation, no suspicion. And the cost. He named a sum that would require her to access personal funds she had saved, money given to her for charitable works and political necessities. Using it for this felt like a desecration, but what choice did she have? Done. You will have the funds tomorrow. Send word when it is accomplished. Master Sung-ho bowed and left, moving through the shadows like smoke. Abany stood alone in her chambers, staring at her hands as though they belonged to someone else. She had just ordered a murder. She had become the very thing she had once despised, someone willing to kill to protect power. But it was not about power, she told herself. It was about survival. It was about preventing further violence. It was about making an impossible choice in an impossible situation. She did not sleep that night or the next. She waited for word, dreading it and longing for it simultaneously. On the third night, Master Sung-ho returned. It is done, Your Majesty. Lord Jian-ho died in his sleep. The physicians have declared it a natural death, likely a failure of the heart brought on by the stress of his circumstances. There will be no investigation. Relief and horror washed over her in equal measure. Thank you, Master Sung-ho. Speak of this to no one. I have already forgotten this conversation, Your Majesty. He vanished into the night, and Abany sat down heavily, her legs no longer able to support her. She had done it. Jian-ho was dead, the threat removed, her people safer. But the cost was her soul. The next morning, the news spread through the palace. Lord Jian-ho, former chief advisor to the king, had died suddenly during the night. There would be funeral rites appropriate to his rank, condolences sent to his family, official mourning for a man who had served the empire for decades. King Song-jun came to her chambers as soon as he heard, his face troubled. Did you know about this? He asked without preamble. She met his eyes steadily, knowing he would see the truth but unable to admit it aloud. I knew he was not well. The stress of the conspiracy trial, the shame of his fall from grace. Such things can break even strong men. Abany. His voice was soft, almost pleading. Tell me you did not do this. Tell me you did not cross that line. What line? The line between justice and murder? The line between protection and assassination? Where exactly is that line, Song-jun? Because I cannot see it anymore. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him shaking. What have we become? He whispered. What has this place made us? Survivors, she said into his chest. We have become survivors. Whether that is enough to justify the cost, I do not know. They stood like that for a long time, two people holding each other up in the aftermath of a choice that could never be undone. The empire mourned Lord Jian-ho with appropriate ceremony. His funeral was attended by hundreds of nobles, officials, and common citizens who had believed in his vision of a pure, traditional empire. They wept for him, praised his wisdom and dedication, spoke of how much the empire would suffer from his loss. Abany attended the funeral, as protocol demanded, standing beside King Song-jun in her formal robes, her face carefully blank. She listened to the eulogies, the stories of his service, the claims that he had died of a broken heart after being unjustly accused by foreign influence. She accepted condolences from his family with appropriate grace, murmuring words of sympathy that tasted like ash in her mouth. And through it all, she felt the weight of what she had done. Not guilt, exactly, or at least not only guilt, but a profound awareness that she had changed, that some line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. She had killed a man, not in self-defense or heat of passion, but deliberately, coldly, with calculation and planning. That made her a murderer, regardless of how justified the reasons might have been. Kofi attended the funeral as well, standing among the other Africans who had been granted permission to pay respects. Afterward, when they found a moment to speak privately, he looked at her with understanding. It was necessary, he said quietly. Was it? Or did I simply choose the easiest path, the one that removed my enemy without requiring me to win fairly? There is no fair in this, Abany. There is only survival and extinction. You chose survival for yourself and for our people. That is not weakness. That is strength. Then why do I feel like I have lost something essential? Because you have. You have lost the luxury of innocence, the belief that you can navigate this world without compromise or blood. But that loss makes you more effective, not less. A queen who cannot make hard choices is a queen who presides over the suffering of those she should protect. She wanted to believe him, but she remembered her mother's words, that last conversation before the fever took her. Survive. That was all she had promised. But her mother had not specified at what cost, had not drawn boundaries around what survival might require. In the days following the funeral, something unexpected happened. The violence against Africans decreased. Not immediately, not entirely, but noticeably. There were still incidents, still harassment and discrimination, but the coordinated attacks, the systematic intimidation, the sense of orchestrated persecution, all of that faded. Without Jianho to lead them, his movement lost direction. Some supporters remained committed to his vision, but they lacked his strategic mind, his ability to organize disparate factions into a unified force. They became simply scattered voices of discontent rather than a serious threat to the regime. King Seongjun used the opening to push through more reforms. Africans were granted the right to own property in certain districts. They could testify in court with their words, given equal weight to Korean testimony. A few were appointed to minor official positions, symbolic perhaps, but significant nonetheless. The changes were small, incremental, but they represented movement in the right direction. Abany supported these reforms publicly while privately wondering if they were enough. She had killed a man to make this possible, to create a space where her people could breathe more freely. But how many more would need to die before they could truly live as equals? How much blood would be required to purchase justice? She found herself pulling away from Seongjun, unable to meet his eyes without wondering what he saw there. Did he see a queen? A partner? Or a woman who had crossed into darkness and might never fully return? He noticed her distance, of course, and tried to bridge it with patience and understanding. But there was a new wariness in him too, a recognition that his wife was capable of things he had not imagined. It created a gap between them, small but growing, a space filled with unspoken truths and questions neither wanted to voice. 3 months after Jianho's death, Abany learned she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, through missed cycles and morning sickness, and a subtle swelling of her body that the palace physicians confirmed with certainty. She was carrying the king's child, an heir to the throne, a baby who would be both Korean and African, royalty and foreign, symbol of everything the empire feared and hoped. When she told Seongjun, his joy was immediate and unguarded. He held her carefully, as though she might break, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "A child," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our child. Do you understand what this means?" "It means my body is no longer my own," she said, but without bitterness. "It means I will grow large and awkward, and the nobles will have opinions about whether a foreign woman should birth an heir. It means we have created something new, something that embodies the empire we are trying to build, one where different peoples can not just coexist, but intertwine. Our child will be living proof that blood does not determine worth, that heritage is gift rather than curse. Or our child will be living proof of contamination, of the pollution of royal blood, of everything wrong with your rule. The nobles will use this against us, Seongjun. They will say the throne itself has been compromised. Let them say what they wish. This child will be protected by law and by force if necessary. I will make it clear that any threat to our child is a threat to the throne itself." She leaned into him, allowing herself a moment of hope. Perhaps this child would be the bridge they needed, the symbol that could heal divisions and create understanding. Or perhaps it would simply be another target, another vulnerability to be exploited by their enemies. As her pregnancy progressed, the palace divided. Some nobles expressed cautious support, recognizing that opposing the royal heir would be dangerous. Others whispered about propriety and tradition, about whether such a child could truly be considered Korean, about the precedent this set for the empire's future. The common people were similarly split. Some viewed the pregnancy with curiosity or even excitement, intrigued by the novelty of a mixed heritage heir. Others saw it as confirmation of their worst fears, evidence that foreign influence had penetrated to the very heart of the empire. In the Eastern Quarter, the news was received with celebration. Kofi brought her word that African families were holding gatherings to honor the coming child, that prayers were being said in their languages to the gods of their homeland. For them, this baby represented hope, the possibility that their children or grandchildren might truly belong to this empire rather than merely existing on its margins. "They are naming her already," Kofi said with a smile. "Though of course they do not know if it will be a boy or a girl. But they are certain she will be a great queen, wise and just, bridging worlds." How can they be so certain? This child might be weak or cruel or foolish. Birth guarantees nothing. They need to believe, Abany. They need something to hope for beyond daily survival. Let them have this. She nodded, understanding but unable to share their optimism. She had seen too much of the palace's darkness, understood too well the constraints that would bind any ruler, regardless of their heritage or intentions. Her child would not be free to simply be good or wise. They would be trapped by the same forces that trapped her, forced to make impossible choices, to compromise and calculate and sometimes do terrible things in service of greater goals. In her 6th month, complications arose. The physicians grew concerned about her health, about the strain the pregnancy was placing on her body. She was ordered to bed rest, confined to her chambers, allowed to receive only a few carefully selected visitors. It was during this confinement that she received another message, this time delivered by Lady Hygiene. "Your Majesty, there is someone who wishes to see you." I hesitated to allow it, given your condition, but she was most insistent. "Who?" "She says she is your sister." Abany's world tilted. "My sister? But that is impossible. She was sold years ago, taken to the southern provinces. How could she be here?" "She claims she heard of your pregnancy and traveled to the capital to see you." I have had her questioned to verify her identity. "The details she provides match what we know of your family history." "Bring her to me. Immediately." Lady Hygiene left, and Abany sat up despite the physician's orders, her heart racing. Could it truly be? After all this time, could she see her sister again? The woman who entered her chambers was thinner than Abany remembered, her face lined with hardship, but unmistakable. Ife, her little sister, who had been only 14 when they were separated, now grown into womanhood, but still bearing the features Abany saw in her own mirror. "Ife," she whispered. "Abany." Her sister's voice broke. "They told me you were queen. I did not believe it. But here you are in this palace, wearing silk and jewels, carrying the king's child. It is like a story, too strange to be real." They embraced, both weeping, years of separation and grief pouring out in that moment. When they finally pulled apart, Abany held her sister at arm's length, drinking in the sight of her. "How did you come here? Are you free? What happened to the merchant who bought you?" "He died 2 years ago. His son released most of his father's servants and slaves, wanting to start fresh. I was given my freedom and a small sum of money. I have been working as a seamstress in a southern village, but when I heard news of an African queen, I knew it must be you. I saved every coin I could and traveled here, hoping to see you before." She touched Abany's swollen belly gently. "Before you became too busy with your new family to remember your old one. I never forgot. I looked for you, made inquiries, but the merchant's household was closed to investigation. I thought I had lost you forever. And yet here we are. Both alive, both free in our different ways." Ife's smile was bittersweet. "Though I think your freedom comes with more constraints than mine." They talked for hours, catching up on lost years, sharing stories of survival and adaptation. Ife described her time in the merchant's household, the work she had done, the people she had met. Abany told her about becoming queen, though she edited the darker parts, the violence and betrayal and moral compromises. "Do you regret it?" Ife asked at one point. "Becoming queen? You could have lived quietly, married someone from our community, raised a family without all this complexity. Every day I regret it. And every day I am grateful for it. It is possible to hold both truths simultaneously." Abany shifted on her cushions, trying to find a comfortable position. "What will you do now?" "You are welcome to stay in the palace, to serve in my household if you wish. Or I can provide you with funds to establish yourself elsewhere if you prefer independence." "I would like to stay, if I may. Not as a servant, though I will work to earn my place. but to be near you, to know my sister, to meet my niece or nephew when they arrive. I have been alone for so long, Abany. I want family again. Then family you shall have. Aoife's presence in the palace was a gift Abany had not known she needed. Her sister became her confidant, the one person she could speak to without calculation or guard. Aoife knew her in ways no one else did, remembered the girl she had been before all of this, before queen and politics and murder. And gradually, Aoife drew her back toward something like peace. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but acceptance. Acceptance that she had done what she believed necessary, that she had made choices in impossible circumstances, that she was neither hero nor villain, but simply human, doing her best in a world that offered no easy answers. In her 8th month, the baby began to move more vigorously, and Abany felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. This child, whatever else it might represent politically, was hers. A person she would love and defend regardless of the circumstances of its birth or the symbolism others might project onto it. King Seongjun visited daily, bringing gifts and gentle conversation, trying to maintain connection despite the distance that still existed between them. He knew something had changed in her, knew she carried secrets she would not share, but he did not press. Perhaps he did not want to know. Perhaps he preferred the comfort of plausible deniability. One evening, as he sat beside her bed, he took her hand carefully. "I have been thinking about the future," he said. "About what kind of empire our child will inherit. I want to believe we have made things better, that the changes we have fought for will last. But I fear we have only created a temporary peace, that without constant vigilance, everything we have built will collapse. Then we must teach our child to be vigilant. To fight for justice even when it is difficult, even when it requires compromise and sacrifice. But not to become what we fought against. Not to let the fight consume them until nothing remains but the battle." She heard the warning in his words, the concern that she had already crossed that line. And perhaps she had. Perhaps the fight had consumed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I will teach them balance," she said. "If I can learn it myself, we will learn together. You, me, and this child who will force the empire to reckon with its own contradictions." The labor came early, in the middle of the night, with a pain that took Abany's breath away. The physicians were summoned, the palace erupted into controlled chaos, and for hours, Abany existed in a world reduced to her body's agony and effort. Aoife held her hand throughout, whispering encouragement in their mother tongue, reminding her to breathe, to push, to trust that her body knew what to do. King Seongjun paced outside the birthing chamber, forbidden by custom from entering but unwilling to leave the corridor. And finally, as dawn broke over the palace, a baby's cry split the air. "A girl," the head physician announced. Healthy, strong-lunged, perfect in every way. They placed the baby in Abany's arms, and she looked down at a tiny face that was both foreign and familiar. Her daughter had her coloring, her features, but something of Seongjun in the shape of her eyes, the set of her mouth. She was exactly what they had made together, something new, something that belonged to both worlds and neither. "She is beautiful," Aoife whispered. "What will you name her?" Abany looked at her daughter, at this small person who represented so much hope and so much danger, and thought of her mother, who had told her to survive. She had survived, and more than survived, she had created something that might outlast all their struggles. "Amara," she said. "It means grace in our language and eternal in Korean. She will be Amara, and she will carry both our histories forward." King Seongjun was allowed in then, and when he saw his daughter, his face transformed with wonder. He held her carefully, marveling at her tiny fingers, her soft breathing, the perfection of her existence. "She will change everything," he said softly. "Just by being herself, she will force people to see beyond their prejudices, to recognize that blood and heritage do not determine worth. Or she will be hated for her very existence," Abany said. "We must protect her, Seongjun, from everyone who would use her as a symbol or a target. We will. I swear it. No harm will come to her while I draw breath." It was a promise he could not fully keep, Abany knew. No one could protect anyone completely in this world. But it was a promise made with love and determination, and that would have to be enough. The empire received news of the princess's birth with mixed reactions. Some celebrated, seeing her as a bridge between cultures, a hope for a more inclusive future. Others viewed her with suspicion or outright hostility, calling her a mongrel, claiming she had no legitimate right to royal status. But she existed, undeniable and real, and her existence changed the calculations of everyone who had to acknowledge her. The nobles could not simply ignore an heir to the throne, regardless of their personal feelings. The common people could not maintain abstract hatred for foreigners when confronted with a specific child who bore both Korean and African heritage. Abany recovered from the birth slowly, her body taking time to heal, her mind struggling with the new reality of motherhood. She had thought becoming queen was the greatest challenge of her life, but it paled compared to the responsibility of raising this child, of preparing her for a world that would judge her every action through the lens of her mixed heritage. In the quiet moments when she nursed Amara, when it was just the two of them in the stillness of dawn, Abany would whisper stories to her daughter. Stories of their homeland, of her grandmother who had been wise and strong, of the journey across oceans, and the struggle to survive in a foreign land. She told her about the price of survival, the choices that had been made, the blood that had been spilled. "You will have to be stronger than I was," she whispered. "Wiser, more patient, more careful. You will carry burdens I cannot yet imagine. But you will also carry hope. You will be proof that different peoples can create something beautiful together, that heritage is not a curse but a gift." Amara, of course, understood none of it. She simply fed and slept and cried, as all babies do. But Abany needed to say the words, to make the promises, to articulate the future she hoped her daughter might inhabit. Weeks turned into months. Amara grew, becoming more alert, more responsive. She smiled at her father's face, reached for her aunt's fingers, found comfort in her mother's arms. She was simply a baby, unaware of the political significance projected onto her existence. And gradually, as the empire adjusted to her presence, something unexpected happened. The violence against Africans continued to decline. Not through any specific decree or enforcement, but through a subtle shift in perception. It became harder to demonize an entire people when the royal heir embodied their blood. It became more complicated to advocate for their expulsion when doing so would implicitly threaten the princess. The change was not universal or complete. There were still those who hated, still places where Africans were unwelcome, still incidents of discrimination and violence. But the trajectory had shifted. The empire was moving, however slowly, toward a future where foreign heritage was not automatically disqualifying, where different peoples might eventually coexist with something approaching equality. On Amara's first birthday, King Songjun organized a ceremony of recognition, formally presenting her to the court and the empire as his heir. It was a declaration of intent, a statement that he would not allow questions of legitimacy to cloud her future. The ceremony was magnificent, attended by nobles from across the empire, by foreign dignitaries, by common citizens who crowded the palace grounds hoping for a glimpse of their princess. Amara, dressed in tiny silk robes, was paraded through the halls while officials read proclamations of her status and worth. Abany stood beside Songjun, holding her daughter when she grew fussy, watching the reactions of the assembled crowd. She saw acceptance in some faces, calculation in others, hostility in a few. But overwhelmingly, she saw curiosity. People wanted to see this child who represented something new, wanted to witness history being made. When it was over, when the ceremonies had concluded and the guests had departed, Abany sat in her chambers with Ife and Kofi, the three of them exhausted but satisfied. "You have done it," Kofi said. "Against all odds, against all opposition, you have secured a place for Africans in this empire. Not just as tolerated foreigners, but as part of the empire's very foundation." Amara's existence changes everything. "It changes some things," Abany corrected. "But there is still so much work to do. So many injustices to correct, so many barriers to break down. This is not victory. It is simply progress. But progress is no small thing. When I think of where we were when we arrived, frightened and powerless, compared to where we are now, with one of our own as queen and the royal heir carrying our blood, it is more than I dared dream." Abany held Amara close, feeling the weight of her sleeping daughter in her arms. I hope we have created a better world for her. I hope the choices I made, the things I did, will be justified by the future she inherits. You can only ever do your best with the knowledge you have in the moment, Aoife said gently. You have done that. You have fought for your people, protected your family, built something that will last beyond your lifetime. That is enough, Abany. It has to be enough. Perhaps it was. Perhaps that was all anyone could ever achieve, to fight as well as they could, to make the hard choices, to hope that the next generation would build on their foundation and create something better. The empire was not perfect. Justice was not universal. But things were better than they had been, and they would continue to improve if people kept working, kept fighting, kept refusing to accept oppression as inevitable. Abany looked down at her daughter's face, so peaceful in sleep, and made a final promise. She would raise this child to be strong but compassionate, powerful but humble, proud of her heritage but not limited by it. She would teach her to fight for justice without becoming cruel, to defend the vulnerable without sacrificing her own humanity. And if she succeeded, if Amara grew to be the kind of ruler who could bridge divides and build understanding, then perhaps all the compromises and sacrifices would have been worthwhile. Perhaps the darkness Abany had walked through would be justified by the light her daughter might create. Outside the palace windows, the sun set over the capital, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the eastern quarter, African families gathered for evening meals, speaking in their languages, practicing their customs, no longer quite so afraid. In the palace, a Korean king and his African queen held their daughter and dreamed of a better future. It was not perfect. It was not complete. But it was beginning, and beginnings held possibility. They held hope. And hope, however fragile, was worth everything they had paid for it.